You are listening to the Billy D's podcast.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. My name is Billy D's. If you have never checked us out before, and we have a lot of new people coming in. If you are new here, we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. Today, we're going to have a commentary for you. A couple of things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about what the partisan ranks have dubbed the seditious six. We'll call them, for the purposes of objectivity, we will call them the Democrats, who issued this video reminding, and we're going to talk about, I'm going to use the term reminding, but we're going to talk about some of the terms that have been used here. Reminding people who are in the military, in the service, that they don't have to follow orders that are illegal. Interesting. We're going to talk about that. And I'm going to focus on Mark Kelly because he's the one that has really kind of irked me in all of this. So I'm going to focus on Mark Kelly. That's kind of going to be the focus of today's podcast, but we're going to veer into some other things. We're going to talk about the tolerance for violent crime that we have in this country, which has gotten worse. Now, I've always been somebody, I guess, that is kind of right of center, but even in my younger days, when we have to have generally we have more liberal leanings. Even back then, I never understood the tolerance for violent crime that we have in the United States. It seems like people crawl out of the woodwork to defend a violent criminal while the victim gets squat. There's no, when you get arrested, you get read all of your rights. When you're a victim of crime, you don't have that because you really don't have any. You're basically on your own. And this is something that has really bothered me over the years. We're going to touch on this and the new movement now to go after these radically lenient judges. As a matter of fact, I would call them social workers with a black robe on. We're going to talk a little bit about them. Before we officially start in all of the content for today's episode, I just a couple of programming notes for the regular listeners and for the new people that are coming in. In the wake of Thanksgiving, this is we are in production today, November 29th, and Thanksgiving was just a few days ago. And those types of holidays, whether it be Memorial Day weekend, July 4th, obviously Christmas, New Year's, those huge holidays sometimes cause a disruption in the listening patterns when it comes to the new media. And, of course, we're a part of that, podcasting and so forth. Podcasting, people generally consume podcasts while they're doing other things, while they're commuting or whatever, going on a trip or during their lunch hour or getting ready for the day at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they're setting up their desk and they put on a podcast. Well, those patterns are thrown off. But I got to tell you, we have remained very steady through this last year during those times. So I want to thank you for listening to the podcast. With that being said, when we have guests and all that on, we sometimes try to avoid the big holidays because we obviously want our guests to get the most exposure as possible. And coming up, we have this coming weekend. Again, we are in production November 29th. We do have a very interesting interview coming up in the next episode cycle. And we also have, I won't say her name because I'm going to be talking about other things today, and I don't want her to unfairly get associated with some of the things I'm going to talk about today. But we are going to have a gubernatorial candidate from Kansas on the program. She's been on the program before, and she's going to be on again. So a lot of interesting things coming up. And always we try to stay on topic with some of the major things that are going on here on the program. Okay, we're going to get into this video that these 6 Democrats put out. Now, this was a few days before the horrible shooting involving the National Guard people. And at the time that we are in production, very sadly, one of them has passed. And the other one, the exact status is unknown, but it's still being presented as critical. And I believe that kind of speaks for itself. And we're going to get into that too. That's a part of this scenario here. But these 6 Democrats, and if you're wondering exactly who they are, I will let them tell you for themselves.
I'm Senator Alyssa Slotkin.
Senator Mark Kelly.
Representative Chris Deluzio.
Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander.
Representative Chrissy Houlihan.
Congressman Jason Crow.
Okay, that's who they are. Now, they had this presentation that they did was, I don't know, maybe 2 minutes long. I'll spare you that. I'll spare you the whole thing, but there's a couple of key areas that I want to focus on. So here's some of what they had to say.
This administration is pitting our uniformed military
And intelligence community professionals
Against American citizens.
Wow, that sounds pretty serious. You must have some examples. You must have some direct evidence of this. Nothing too specific comes up. All right, fine. Let's move on. I'm going to switch just a moment because I want to put some perspective on the terminology that has been used around this video, this message that has been put out. Let's switch our attention to Pete Buttigieg just here for a moment, because he issued a statement in the form of a post on X, which at one time was Twitter. Okay, and this is his post. Let me read this to you. As a military officer, I was repeatedly trained on the law concerning illegal orders. Now, veterans citing this law have been targeted by the president with threats of prosecution and death because they oppose him politically. If the government acts against them, it will further display President Trump's thirst for the one thing our republic cannot abide: tyranny. Wow. That's pretty profound, I would have to say. Now, I want to go back to this first line. As a military officer, I was repeatedly trained on the law concerning illegal orders. Now, some of you might remember A Few Good Men, that movie. And the line in that movie was, if your orders are obeyed, your orders are obeyed without question, why did this person need to be moved off the base? What was the urgency if you clearly stated he was not to be touched and your orders are obeyed? And we kind of have the same thing here. I want to read this first line again. As a military officer, I was repeatedly trained on the law concerning illegal orders. Wow. I guess that must have made an impression on you. Which begs the question, why was this message needed? For what purpose was this reminder, was this, whatever you want to call it, out to the fine people in uniform, that they don't have to obey illegal orders when it clearly is repeatedly trained in you on the law concerning illegal orders? Why the reminder? What purpose does it serve? What could that possibly be? Now, let's go back to some more of the verbiage that he uses. He says, now, veterans citing this law. Let's play a little bit of this citing and see. You tell me, does this sound like casually citing or referencing this law?
Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
Now, honestly, does that sound like citing this law? Does that sound like some sort of a reference? Or does it sound like a warning? Does it sound very foreboding? And of course, they have the bullshit music in the background, like they're playing taps for the country. The end is near. And if you feel that I'm embellishing this, listen to this.
Who we are as Americans. Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Don't give up.
Don't give up the ship.
Don't give up. Please don't give up the ship. You must refuse illegal orders. Does this sound like citing or referencing a law in some casual manner? No, this is something that is meant to spark unrest. It is unfortunate that maybe some of our service people are going to be a little bit shaken by this, but my guess is most of them are not. However, in the public, there are people who are believing that there is going to be this horrible event. Who knows what it's going to be? And that's part of the aura of the fear that they are they're being non-specific as to what's coming. So they're letting your imagination do the work. It's kind of like when Steven Spielberg directed Jaws. You know, what was under the water, when he showed the surface of the water, what was under the water created more tension than when the shark came out of the water. Your imagination did the work. And that's what they're doing here. Don't give up the ship. Don't forget, you must not obey illegal orders. Now, we don't have any specific things to mention here, either that have happened or that are going to happen, but just don't give up the ship. And there's people out there, I know, I've talked to them, who are worried that some horrible thing is going to happen, whether it's going to be a civil war or they're going to unleash poison gas on the country. I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous what these six have done with this. There's no reason for it to be done. As Pete Buttigieg said himself very clearly, as a military officer, he was repeatedly trained on the law concerning illegal orders. There's no reason for this to be publicly stated to the society at large. There is absolutely no reason for it. The only reason is to undermine what is happening with the government right now. That is the only reason. And if you are really concerned that whatever is happening now is so bad, then there are other ways, especially as a senator, that you should be taking action rather than alarming the public without any specific things to point at. In the days leading up to the shooting of the National Guard, here's what Slotkin had to say. She literally just made something up.
It makes me incredibly nervous that we're about to see people in law enforcement, people in uniform military get nervous, get stressed, shoot at American civilians. It is a very, very stressful situation for these law enforcement and for the communities on the ground. So it was basically a warning to say, like, if you're asked to do something, particularly against American citizens.
All right. Now, what she is saying there is, even though you have been repeatedly trained on the law concerning illegal orders, don't open fire. Don't get nervous and open fire on American citizens. That's basically what she's saying right there. As I said, I am going to focus, however, on Mark Kelly. Now, Mark Kelly is a retired astronaut. He is a former naval officer, and he is serving as senator in Arizona, a seat he has held since 2020. He is, of course, a member of the Democratic Party. Now, he has a twin brother named Scott. and I say this because this does cause some confusion. A number of years ago, I would see one of them in the news somewhere, and then sometime later, the other one somewhere else. And I was like, well, wait a minute, how did they get from there to there? And, of course, they're twin brothers. And both have credentials as astronauts. As a matter of fact, Scott, here again, his identical twin, is the one that stayed in space for like 340 days. And being that they're twins, it was a landmark study because they studied the effect of, being in space when they had the twin brother that stayed on Earth and how they would, be different after that amount of time in space. So these guys have a lot of earned respect. I would say earned respect. And, of course, they put their well-being on the line in service of their country. And that's the part that when people do that, when people take their well-earned respect and parlay it into political influence, that is kind of what bothers me. And he's in no stretch of the imagination is he the only person who has done this. There's a certain what I would call pop culture physicist out there that I used to really enjoy. When one of his videos came along, I was checking it out. When he wrote something or was in something or was doing a television appearance, I would soak it all up. And I sometimes wonder if some of these people who are so smart, who are constantly being told how smart they are, if they don't start believing that they know everything. This physicist that I had so much respect for all of a sudden went off the rails with some stuff. He was involved in some discussion about who would win, Batman or Superman. Then he's talking about that there's no need for having, male sports and female sports. And the one, if I got this quote right, and here again, I'm not saying his name because I don't want to talk about this guy necessarily, but this is all coming from the world of really smart people, supposedly. He says that, we do a lot of things to enhance our performance in sports. We eat a lot of protein. We do a lot of lifting. So why not take steroids? What's the big deal? I mean, this is where this can go. And that's at its most innocent, presuming that these people just get so full of themselves that they really do believe that they know everything. But the more sinister side is they use the influence that a lot of them have rightly earned, and they parlay it into either some social cause or some political cause. And this is what irks me about Mark Kelly. Because he was somebody that I once admired. He was somebody that I once really and truly, man, these two brothers, man, these guys are really something. And then Mark Kelly turns around and issues this bullshit message loaded with ideas and innuendo that stoke fear in the American public. And the question becomes, for what purpose? He knows that people are going to listen to this and say, wow, there's this guy who's so smart. He's an astronaut and he's, educated and he's, military. And he's saying this, something bad must really going to be happening. Well, so what purpose is he doing this for? He cites nothing specifically. And this whole thing was partisan. They all were Democrats. And the only conclusion that we can come up with at this time is that they did it to undermine the current leadership in government. And this is what really ticks me off. Somebody who's as high up in government as he is, if he really wants to call attention to things he doesn't agree with, there are plenty of ways to do it. There are plenty of ways to go out on the stump. There are plenty of ways to go out and cite specific examples of what Trump has done and why it has had a negative impact. There are plenty of ways that he can do it without this kind of grand partisan bullshit is what it is. Until he can cite something specific, this is nothing but bullshit. And I got to tell you, he did not help himself in the wake of the horrible shooting of the National Guard's people. First of all, it really bugs me anytime someone is shot in cold blood. There has been blame put on the Biden administration for allowing the D.C. National Guard shooting suspect into the country. He was an Afghan national. However, he reportedly had worked with the CIA. And he not only helped the intelligence, but apparently helped our forces in some way. So he was brought in under that umbrella. And, when somebody helps the United States, naturally you are inclined to help them when things go wrong in the country, in the country that you have your forces in, because they helped the United States, so they are in danger. And quite frankly, we have abandoned people who have helped the United States more than once. We certainly did it when Saigon fell. And the next time you go into somewhere and you want to start, building relationships with informants, you want to start building relationships with the local intelligence community, that's kind of hard to do when you have a track record of throwing them to the wolves as soon as it is expedient. So I understand, if this is all true, that he really did help United States forces over there, this suspect in Afghanistan, that you would bring him in under some sort of, a good deed, under the guise of a good deed. But something happened. And I'm not saying this to be funny, but I've heard it mentioned. I don't know what's more scary, that he was radicalized over here by Islamic extremists who are here, or whether it's this kind of rhetoric that's always coming out of the Democratic Party. And here again, I am not a partisan. Okay, but the constant references to Hitler, and I don't want to get into this debate about, Trump says bad things. All right, maybe he called somebody a pig, maybe he didn't. But those kind of names, even though they are not becoming the president of the United States, I would totally agree with that. Okay, that's not something that the president of the United States should be saying. They are relatively meaningless. Calling somebody a pig, it's an insult. It's uncouth, but it really doesn't mean anything. When you start calling people fascists and you start calling people Hitler and you start issuing warnings that the uptight military might start opening fire on American citizens, that's a completely different gig. Okay, and you can talk around it any way you want to, but it is a completely different gig. And I would add this about Mark Kelly. I've really begun to wonder how smart this guy really is. Because as somebody who works in PR, understands a little bit about public relations and marketing and all these other things, when something, for instance, with that horrible shooting, they issued that statement, then the shooting happens a few days later, and he's under heavy criticism for intimating that the real threat is the president of the United States or the administration, and then something like this happens. So he's under a lot of criticism. And it really doesn't matter if the criticism is fair or not in these situations. But what you have to do is just kind of lay low, and then you make your case. You make your case, you refine your message. And generally you can move past it, but he is totally tone deaf. I mean, he was tweeting or posting, as they say now, on X all the time about Thanksgiving and all this other kind of crap. And he's being bombarded with all these negative messages. And I sometimes wonder if maybe these messages were programmed by somebody and they're just automatically going out. In which case, somebody should have had the wherewithal to say, hey, listen, we need to shut this down for a few days. Okay, because he's issuing all these statements and he's just being bombarded with all this negativity. and it's fueling it. You know, there comes a point where you have to read the room. And at this time, you're on the hot seat. And now is not the time to be posting all of these bullshit posts. It's just not the time to do it. While we are transitioning, I just wanted to speak about this briefly. As far as I know, at least Mark Kelly posted very positively about Thanksgiving. And a lot of people on the left, on the far left in particular, simply can't do that. You know, the most innocent of holidays, all it really is a chance for families to get together and have some extra food. That's really all it is. And somehow or other, this has turned into an ugly thing. Participating in this means you're ignoring the people who are without things, or you're ignoring the history of Thanksgiving, which has somehow turned into some ugly thing. And the fact of the matter is, anything now, I'm starting to believe this. I didn't believe it at first. When I heard conservatives say this, I kind of figured, well, it's partisan bullshit. But no. Anything that any tradition that we have now that brings people together is under attack. It's something that we shouldn't be doing. You know, Thanksgiving is ugly. July 4th is ugly. All right. And, you know, getting into the whole thing about Christmas and happy holidays and all this other stuff. It's what's wrong with wishing somebody Merry Christmas? You know, I'm not Jewish, but if one of my Jewish friends comes up to me and says Happy Hanukkah, I will gladly wish them Happy Hanukkah back. In this day and age, when it's so difficult to say anything good to another person, when somebody wishes me something, says something nice to me, I'm going to take it. But on the far left now, you can't even compliment somebody without it not being good enough. It doesn't acknowledge their pain. And it's all part of an orchestrated attack on the things that bring people together traditionally in the United States, in our culture, in our society. Now, that may or may not be the case. Maybe that's just my opinion, but I'll tell you one thing as I move into this next thing. I really, as I mentioned at the top of the show, really do not understand the empathy and the sympathy and everything else involved around violent criminals. I just don't get it. There has been talk of a Judicial Accountability Act, which would start imprisoning judges who keep releasing violent repeat offenders. Any judge who releases a defendant on personal recognizance or low bail, and that defendant commits another felony within 12 months, faces automatic federal charges, up to 10 years in prison and permanent disbarment. Now, they're talking about a public database for some of these goofball judges and everything else. And the Democrats are saying, oh, this is an attack on judicial independence. All right. Let me tell you something. I am for judicial independence. When the three strikes thing was going on, I didn't like that because there's always an exception. There are always, extreme circumstances. And I don't like the idea of a judge's hands being tied. I would agree with that. But it's gone too far the other way. These judges now, I don't know what world they're living in. They let these violent people out. I'm not talking about people who steal hubcaps. I'm talking about people who do horrible, violent things. Just consider what's happened on these subways and these trains. You have young girls being stabbed to death in the neck, being burned with gasoline. All these other horrible things going on. And these people have rap sheets as long as the Declaration of Independence. I don't understand this. In what world... What's going on with the system? Is it really just the judges or is it more? I don't know. But I got to tell you, it's awful. And it seems now that these threats to society are the first people the left rally to support. An example of this would be Luigi Mangione, the accused killer of Brian Thompson, who was the CEO of United Healthcare. Now, granted, healthcare companies and the management thereof are not the most popular people in the world, to say the least. But that does not mean that I would condone shooting someone in cold blood. And here again, I just absolutely hate that. I believe it was from behind in this case. Just came up from behind him and took him out. And he's become some sort of a folk hero. There's all these predators who get let go time and time again. And that's why there's support for these kinds of measures. I don't know where this is going to go. This is House Bill H.R. 9177, the Judicial Accountability Act, introduced on November 27th, 2025. This is something that may or may not go anywhere. I don't know, but I can tell you the feeling behind it is because people are getting tired of this shit. Prosecutors, and I'll tell you right now, one of the very big problems with our judicial system is the discretion that district attorneys have in terms of which cases they will prosecute and which ones they won't. That's the unspoken thing right there, in my opinion, Billy D's. That's my opinion. That's one of the big problems. And between these prosecutors who have a history now, a very well-documented history of having a political cause at the center of their campaign, have a political cause at the center of their mission as district attorney, rather than locking up bad people. People are getting tired of that. And they're getting tired of these judges who just find reasons to let these dirtbags go. And I don't understand what purpose is this serving anyone? Well, who benefits from this? I don't get it. And then at the same time, the left wants to get rid of the police. So they champion these judges who are lenient on violent criminals, and then they don't want the police in the streets protecting the people from them. And if you have the audacity to defend yourself and actually hurt one of these dirtbags, you're the one who's in trouble. People are getting tired of this bullshit. And I will never understand the tolerance. I can understand some bad ideas. I can understand why young people are fascinated with the idea of socialism. Okay, I can understand why people want certain things that in the big context of things, even communism, I can understand why some people, check that out and say, yeah, maybe communism is a good thing. Now, I don't agree with it, but I can understand. I can see why people look at some of the inequities that we have in our society and say, all right, maybe communism isn't such a bad thing. Maybe socialism isn't such a bad thing. I can understand where it comes from. I cannot understand where in the F it comes from that it's a good idea to let these violent criminals go, or to give them light sentences, or to make excuses for them, turn them into heroes. I simply do not understand how these violent criminals have become symbols of injustice in our society. That to me is, I don't have an explanation for it. I simply do not have an explanation for it. All right. Well, anyway, that's our podcast for this week, Thanksgiving week, leading into the month that is December and all the holidays. And we still will have, like I mentioned in our talking about our programming notes at the beginning, we still are going to maintain a regular schedule through the holidays during the weeks leading up to Christmas and New Year's, as it's scheduled right now. One interview for sure, possibly two, and some other things, some co-host situations and some other things going on. Between Christmas and New Year's, that's a real tough one. That's when people really, mix up their habits in terms of how they consume content. But we will maintain our basic release schedule, which is roughly an episode every week to 10 days. And we maintain that throughout the year, sometimes even more frequently if there's stuff going on. And the best way to keep up on all the podcast episodes here is to simply subscribe to the Billy D's podcast. Now, there is no paywall. So no matter what platform you are listening to this on, you can subscribe, and there's no paywalls. You don't hit any paywalls. If you choose to follow me on X, which is the former Twitter, there's no paywalls. I'm not one of those people that has subscriptions in the social media. So anything that we have a small Facebook page, that's only for really diehard people that really are into the production of these things. But you're welcome to follow it, and there's no paywalls there either. Okay. Our listeners are what matters. We have a 10-year history on all the major platforms here at the Billy D's podcast. And we cherish each and every listen that we get. And we make it easy for the listeners to enjoy our content. Now, we do video casts as well. The video casts are usually available on X under my highlights tab on Billy D's, at Billy D's on X. The video casts aren't produced for every episode. For example, this episode is audio only. And our playground has always been the podcast platforms. And we make sure that our subscribers get each and every episode in a podcast form. And for the ones that do have video supplements, here again, it's free. And those are primarily listed on X at Billy D's under the highlights tab. Okay. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. And we will talk to you again very, very soon. I'm Billy D's and host of the self-titled podcast, The Billy D's Podcast. We are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast featuring authors and creators talking about their craft, advocates for community issues, and myself and an array of co-hosts discussing current events. There's no partisan ranting and raving going on here, just great content. You can find The Billy D's Podcast on your favorite platform and on Twitter at Billy D's. Thank you, and I hope you listen in.